Welcome to the Internet of Things Made Simple. I'm Larry Humor. It's always difficult if you take on a controversial topic. You start wondering, do I offer my own personal opinion? Do I try to stay neutral and walk the line? It's always a bit of a give and take. Now I'm taking on 3 controversial topics with this blog post, so it's going to be even more fun. What we're going to be talking about today is the announcement from the Trump administration about self-driving cars, and we're going to look at, will it actually worsen income inequality? So 3 topics that definitely have no shortage of opinions. In terms of the announcement, it kind of flew under the radar, and perhaps that had to do with the Kavanaugh hearings, I'm not sure. I'm just going to read one of the lines. It says that it no longer will assume that a commercial motor vehicle driver has to be human, or that a trucker or anyone else has to be in the cab while a driverless system is operating. It didn't actually mandate anything, this policy. It was just guidelines, but the idea is that it will loosen some regulations and encourage federal, state, and local impediments to be dropped. So this basically tries to move forward self-driving cars. In some ways, obviously there's some great things to this. I believe personally that self-driving cars will improve safety. So that is kind of a good thing from this. But now you have to examine as well, what's the potential impact for income equality? And we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to assume there is no controversy on income equality. I know some people believe that it isn't as bad of a problem, other people see it as being worse. I'll have to put that aside for a second. The other part I'll have to put aside is some of the policies that might have been done over the years by the different governments. Not a place for us to discuss that today. Instead, what we're going to talk about is how these potential changes might make any income equality, no matter what level you believe there is right now, how it might make it worse. Today, tens of millions of people around the world make their living driving. Whether it's the obvious ones like bus driver, taxi driver, long-haul truck driver, or perhaps the less obvious ones like people that are driving on a big mine site or a tow motor or some kind of forklift at an industrial site. When you start to bring in driverless vehicles, you potentially put these people out of work. And obviously it's not going to happen all at once. We simply couldn't build enough machines for it to happen all at once. But the idea is, over time, the larger the introduction of self-driving cars, the more people you're going to put out of work. The other important part that people don't talk about in this area is that many of the self-driving vehicles are actually electric. And it doesn't have to be, but there seems to be a progression of, if I'm going to make a self-driving vehicle, why not be totally environmentally friendly and make it electric? You may wonder why I'm bringing this up. It's because electric vehicles have a lot less ongoing maintenance than traditional vehicles. They don't need their oil change, things to be lubricated, things like that. So look at all the people that are involved in auto parts, mechanics, different service companies. When we move towards self-driving cars, I believe it's inevitable many of them will be electric. So you have to factor that in, that not only you're going to have millions of drivers, but all the people that support that infrastructure could be affected. The other part is, if the effect happened right across the spectrum of people equally, it might not be such a bad problem, but it doesn't. This move will affect the bottom 50%, and however you define that, that's up to you, but the people in the lower half of the income brackets are going to be affected at a much, much higher rate than those in, say, the top 10%. So we have to factor that in, that people who are in the bottom 50% aren't generally living very glamorous lives. They're often just trying to get by. And so if we're going to see a much harder hit to that base, we really have to do some things in preparation for that. The last part is, I don't want to stop self-driving cars, and I'm not sure that most people, if they know the facts, really do as well. It really should improve safety, and I believe that will save a lot of lives, and that obviously is important. After the break, we're going to talk about how do we handle the fallout of automation, not just self-driving cars, but many of the other jobs that are expected to be eliminated as well. Back soon. A while back, I read an article where it asked people, who should be responsible for training and for changing the educational system and the way we learn in the face of automation? And it was funny because the answer actually varied quite heavily from country to country. Some countries believed it was all the responsibility of the government. Other ones believed that the individual had much more responsibility, and most were somewhere in the middle. So if we know that automation will put millions of people out of work in, say, the next 20 to 50 years, how do we start reacting today? Well, it will have to be a combination, I don't think anyone disagrees about that, of both the government and personal responsibility. So it's a matter of figuring out what we can all do together. The first is training. We have a lot of workers now who are going to have issues finding new roles in this new economy. So we have to start being a little more proactive on training. And that's both educational training in traditional facilities, but also enabling or encouraging businesses to retrain their employees. Perhaps we have to mandate that, and perhaps it has to be through tax incentives. I'll leave that up to you to determine that. But either way, it's something we definitely should do. The other way might come across as being a bit punitive, or it might be very effective, I'm not really sure, is actually to tax automation. So the theory would be, if I replaced an employee with a robot, that the robot would actually have to pay taxes. It sounds kind of funny to say that, but that's kind of what it talks about. So say as an example, that person made $30,000 a year. The robot might make $20,000 a year, and the company would be responsible for paying taxes and potentially other deductibles for them. Not sure if that would work. It's an interesting idea. Long term, I think the more important thing is that we have to change the educational system. We can't keep on teaching for old school jobs if most of them aren't going to be there in a few years. So I've listed this before, so you might have heard this list, so perhaps I'm being a bit repetitive. But for those of you who haven't, here's 4 ways that we can change the educational system for our kids going forward, and we got to start today, to allow them to better handle the jobs of the future. 1, increase the focus on the STEM studies, which stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. By doing that, we're going to allow the kids to better understand technology. And that's everything from computer systems to programming to data analysis. We have to start them young. The second part is we have to encourage more creative learning. And no, I'm not talking about book reports necessarily. We talked about this in a previous podcast, but we need to change how they think, and it has to be in ways that machines can't easily duplicate. So that's more like design, arts, and things like that. There will be many more jobs in the future in that area. 3, we have to encourage interpersonal and team building exercises. It doesn't have to always be person to person or face to face. It can actually be, across the internet using different tools. But the idea is we have to encourage people to work together better as groups, because that's something machines haven't quite figured out yet. If you've ever tried to interact with a robot, they sound like a robot, as good as they've become lately. The last part is an expression that I use, and my kids absolutely hate this expression because they hear it way too often, and that's that you have to learn how to learn. And what I'm talking about here is you have to be able to adapt to a changing environment. So when it comes to what's going to happen in the future, none of us know what's going to be the jobs of the future 30 years out. But if you enable people to quickly learn and focus on skills that force them to learn new things, that will put them in a better place for the future. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I look forward to having you listen to future ones. I'm going to be launching full-length episodes on November 1st. They're going to be available on iTunes, Spotify, and just about anywhere else you download your podcast. I also encourage you to check out my YouTube videos. They're under Novatech Knows. There's a number of blog posts there. And finally, we have some learning tools on iTunes under the name The Internet of Things Made Simple. I encourage you to download those as well. Thanks for listening. I'm Larry Bohumer.